today's video is all about making this lovely Quilt As You Go project bag, and I'm using Liberty fabric, so I will share lots of tips for making that easier. And Serious Readers have very kindly sponsored today's video. I'll tell you all about their Serious Lights range later on. So for today's project bag that we're going to make, you need some quilt blocks. Now I'm going to make mine from this wonderful book called Alice's Wonderland Sampler Quilt, which was very kindly gifted to me by Alice Caroline, and I'll leave a link in the description with information about that. It's a lovely book all about making a sampler quilt, and I'm going to make 4 blocks from this book. The blocks turn out at 6.5 inches, so that's going to be the size of mine, but you can use any blocks that you have and any size really, because we're going to do Quilt As You Go method. So it's really nice for those blocks that you have lying around, those test blocks that you don't know what to do with. This is a great way of using them up. They just all need to be the same size. So I've already made 2 here. This is a really simple 9 patch, and I was just experimenting with different Liberty fabrics to see what it would look like, and I just love the idea of them being all mismatched and all different bright colours. It was just so fun to make them. So the fabric in today's project is Liberty Tana lawn, and it comes in so many beautiful colours and prints. It's really my favourite fabric to use, but it is a thinner fabric to normal quilting cotton, but it has a really high thread count and it's really strong, so it's great to sew with. But there are a few adjustments we can make, and I'm going to share these tips with you now, and they will help to make the sewing process even easier. So first of all, I would recommend choosing a finer thread in your machine when working with Liberty Tana lawn. Now typically with quilting cotton, a normal quilting cotton, I would use a 50 weight thread, but I like to use this Deco Bob by Wonderfil, which is an 80 weight polyester thread in both the top and bottom threads of the machine. You can buy the pre-wound bobbins and you can get them in different sizes, so you just need to look up which sizes for your machine, and I find them to be really good. Because the thread is really fine, it takes up less space in the seam, which means you can get really flat seams. And I've done this for a while and just find it to be a really good combination and great for this fabric. So another thing that you might want to do is reduce the stitch length a little bit, just because you've got a finer, denser fabric, and you will also want to loosen the tension as well, and that will just help your stitches to sit nicely on the fabric. Because it is a finer fabric, you will find you need to loosen your tension a little bit. Now it's a good idea to use a finer pin than you would normally choose when you're pinning Liberty Tana lawn, because the fabric is really dense because of its really high thread count. So I like these Clover extra fine pins, but you can get fine pins from many of the different brands. You'll just find it easier than trying to use a normal pin, which will just require a little bit more pushing to get it through the fabric, and you don't want to create holes, so use finer pins. My next top tip is to use a straight stitch throat plate on your machine. Now on this machine it is a straight stitch only machine, so the throat plate has a tiny hole in it, especially for straight stitches, but on my old machine it does multiple stitches, so the throat plate that it came with has a bigger hole in it. So what I actually did was purchase a straight stitch only throat plate for this machine, which then means it gives you a smaller hole. And the reason for that is when you're working with fine fabric, particularly at the beginning of a seam, if you've got a larger hole in the throat plate, you can find that your fabric gets dragged into that hole and can get stuck and jammed. So it's a little bit of an investment to buy a different throat plate, but if you work a lot with Liberty Tana lawn, then I really do recommend it. It was a game changer for me and it makes it so much easier. And finally, you'll want to use a slightly finer needle as well to your typical needle that you would use for quilting. So I recommend a 70/10 needle, universal needle, and that will work really well. So now on to the tutorial for making the Quilt As You Go project bag. I have my quilt blocks, which are 6.5 inches square, and I cut some wadding to match those at 6.5 inches square. And then my backing fabric I cut to be 8 inches square. So whatever size your block is, just make your backing fabric 1.5 inches bigger than it, and then that will give you enough space to fold over your seams once you've centered your block in the middle of it, to fold them over to bind your block, if you like, in the quilt as you go method. Now I really like using this little clover seam roller tool. I get asked about that a lot. You can use an iron to press this, but if you'd prefer not to, then just use that clover seam roller or a similar tool, and it will give you a nice crisp edge. And then what I like to do is use the wonder clips just to hold everything in place before I then stitch it down. So once the backing fabric has been stitched down all the way around, it's time to quilt the block. Now, I'm trying something different. I usually use 12 weight cotton thread, but my mother-in-law found these amazing pearl cotton threads in a charity shop and got them for me, and they're really lovely. They're a bit thicker than what I usually use, but they come in such beautiful colours. I had a bit of trouble trying to decide which colours to use, but in the end I went for the grey because I just thought it would look nice and stand out against all of the different fabrics. But yeah, they're really nice for hand quilting, big stitch hand quilting, which is what I really like to do. But yeah, I was really spoiled for choice for the colours, so do look out in charity shops and things, because you just never know what gems you'll find there. I know that the recommended retail price for these was really high and she didn't pay that for them, so yeah, a really good bargain and so many colours to choose from. So before doing my quilting, I just marked the lines out using a ruler and an air erasable pen. I just find this to be a really quick and easy way to mark the fabric, and this sew line erasable pen really does work well. It doesn't leave any mark on the fabric at all. It disappears after quite a few minutes sometimes, so you've got to be quick when you stitch it, or you might need to draw the marks on again. But yeah, I do really like this pen and I recommend it. So when it comes to hand quilting, I bury my knot about an inch or so away from where I'm going to start stitching, and then I like to use these needles called Pony Certain Stitch needles, which are really nice because they have a mark on them, which allows you to use that as a guide to make your stitches really uniform in shape. So you can see here that I am lining up the end of that mark with the previous stitch, and then I'm making the gap for the next stitch to come out at the same length as the mark, and just by doing that it really helps to keep the stitches uniform. And yeah, I think they're really good, so I do sell these in my online shop. You don't have to use these needles for hand quilting, but I just like them and it really helps to keep things nice and even. This video has been sponsored by Serious Readers. I've been working with Serious Readers for well over 2 years now, and I have the high definition light from their Serious Lights range in my sewing room, and I've had this light for well over 2 years, and it has made such a difference to my sewing. No matter what the conditions are, whether it's dark and grey outside in the daytime, I use this light, or of course at night time, it makes such a difference. It uses something really unique called daylight wavelength technology, and what this does is replicate the daylight spectrum as closely as technically possible, so you feel like you're stitching in pure daylight. And this relieves eye strain, especially when you're working on tiny stitches. And I really love that you can brighten and dim the light, and it has a flexible arm so you can position it to exactly where you need it to be, and you can just create that perfect sewing environment. All products in the Serious Lights range benefit from a 5-year guarantee, and they are hand built here in the UK. If you're interested in finding out more about the Serious Lights range from Serious Readers, then I'll leave a link in the description box, and I have an offer code for you, and it is SR512, and if you use that code when you purchase a high definition light, you'll get £100 off and also free delivery. So a huge thank you to Serious Readers for sponsoring today's video. So now back to the tutorial, and we are on the final stages of making the bag. So I made a base for the bag in exactly the same way as I made the sides. So the base is 6.5 inches square, and I just used a regular piece of fabric rather than a quilt block for that. And I'm just laying out my blocks to go around it, and I'm just going to ladder stitch them together, and I'm going to do those seams joining it to the base first, and then I'm going to ladder stitch up the sides. Really simple. Now, to do a ladder stitch, you just make a small stitch under the fold of the fabric, and you do that on one side, and then you do the same on the other side directly opposite. And as you go along in this way, you'll see that your stitches look like the rungs of a ladder, and then you just need to pull them tight to hide them. Now I'm using a thicker thread for this. I'm not using the same thread that I used to stitch down the edges of the binding. I'm using a 12 weight thread, and that's because I'm going to pull it quite tightly, and I just find a thicker thread works best for this. And a top tip is to keep your stitches really small and do lots of them, and you'll get a much neater finish this way. Now once you've joined one to the base, then you just need to repeat this for the rest, and I'm just going to do exactly the same ladder stitch, continue all the way around, and then stitch up the sides as well. So now it's time to make some tabs for the ribbon to run through. So you need to cut 4 pieces of fabric at 4 inches by 4.5 inches, and then fold under the seam allowance by 1/2 inch on each side and stitch it in place and give it a nice press, and then fold these tabs in half like so. And then you need to find the center of each tab and the centre of each side of the bag and line them up and stitch them on. And once you've threaded a ribbon through, that's it, the bag is complete. Now I'm using this for a small crochet project, but it would work brilliantly for a small knitting project like socks, because you can thread the yarn through some of the gaps around the bag and keep your yarn inside the bag while you're working on the project. But of course it would be great for any small craft project, great to keep your EPP in on the go. So I really hope that you enjoyed this video and that you'll make one too. Thank you so much, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.